And welcome to the European Parliament for this new edition of Talking Europe. In May, voters across the European Union will elect 741 MEPs. Now, recent polls suggest that anti-EU populist parties from the left and from the right could win up to 25% of the Assembly's seats. What will this mean for the European Parliament? I'll put the question to my guests in a moment.
From France to Greece, populist parties are riding the eurosceptic wave. Marine Le Pen's National Front is leading the polls in France with 24% of the vote, ahead of the main parties, the UMP and the Socialists. The far-right party would obtain 17 seats compared to only 3 at present. In the Netherlands, the Freedom Party headed by Geert Wilders is also leading the polls with 17% of the votes. With such a result, the Dutch anti-Islam party would grab 4 seats. Both parties are currently discussing a possible alliance. In the United Kingdom, the latest polls have the Europhobe UKIP party in second place, just behind Labour with 26% of the vote. On the other side of the political spectrum, Alexis Tsipras is gaining ground in Greece. 1 in 5 citizens are said to favour his anti-austerity party Syriza. They would be taking 5 seats. And in Italy, the eurosceptic Five Star Party, led by comedian Pepe Grillo, would grasp 22% of the vote and would obtain around 20 seats.
Well, let me introduce you to my 2 guests today. Hannes Swoboda, welcome to Talking Europe. You're from Austria. You're, of course, the president of the group of Socialists and Democrats here in the European Parliament. Sir Graham Watson, welcome to Talking Europe. You're from Britain, from the Liberals. You represent Southwest England as well as Gibraltar. And you are the president of the Alliance of Democrats and Liberals and Democrats for Europe party. Populist and anti-Europe parties are poised to do very well at the next European elections. Hannes Swoboda, how worried are you that we are going to see an anti-EU, a eurosceptic tsunami in May?
No tsunami, because these people still will be in minority. It will be a minority. It will be perhaps an increased minority, but one should not suggest that they could dominate the center of European Parliament. The decisions are taken in the center with a party like the PP, the Social Democrats, the Liberals and the Greens, and they will be strong enough to dominate also the politics in future. So yes, for Europe, of course, it's for the image of Europe, it's perhaps a little disaster, because people think outside the world now the right-wing extremists or right and some left-wing extremists have taken over, but this will not be the case. But we have to convince our citizens with our programs, not with a fight against them, with our programs, with a positive campaign to decide between the different political groups in the center. That's our own method to beat them.
Graham Watson, in May, all eyes will be on London, obviously, because in your country, the UK Independence Party, which is an anti-EU party, is poised to do very well. The latest poll shows that up to 26% of the Brits are ready to vote for UKIP. That's ahead of the Conservatives, behind Labour, though. How worried are you?
Well, I am worried because I think that the difficulties of recession will push many voters towards voting for populist or extremist parties, of which the United Kingdom party is one. I think the debate in the United Kingdom is not fundamentally dissimilar from elsewhere. Last year, the Five Star movement took 25% of the vote in Italy. The National Front took 24% of the vote in France. The United Kingdom Independence Party, 26% of the vote in the United Kingdom in local elections. This is the expression of frustration with economic stagnation and with the seeming inability of governments to bring growth back into the system. But I hope the voters will recognize the dangers and look back to Europe's history of the last big recession in the 1920s and what happened then.
Hannes Swoboda, do you agree that it's really the crisis that brought about all these parties, or are there other causes? Because when you look at the United States, they also have a very interesting Tea Party movement over there. They don't have the same crisis as Europe. So who's responsible really for this situation?
The crisis is partly responsible, but also the answers. We fight in this parliament against the answers of austerity, of extreme austerity, not against reforms. Reforms are necessary, but this extreme austerity which is endangering also the social network, the care for the poor. The inequality is rising in Europe and in the United States, even more in the United States, but also in Europe. And people, especially also the middle class, lower middle class, they don't see the way up. They don't see the possibility to climb up the ladder of success and progress. So these are the reasons. It's not only the crisis as such, but the failing and failures in the answers to the crisis. And at the end of the day, I must also say the Tea Party, what did the Tea Party have as a success? A Democrat president. Because the reasonable people have been thrown out from the lists, and many of the Tea Party extremists have not been elected. So again, we have to tell the voters, yeah, you may vote for them, it's democratic right. But it will not change politics in Europe. They will not have any influence on European politics because they don't care about European politics. They don't even work in the parliament. They just speak. But you cannot change with slogans European politics.
As a British MEP, you know better than me what the mood is like across Europe. A lot of Europeans are dissatisfied, disillusioned with Europe. A lot of Europeans wonder, what does Europe really do? And the problem, I guess, is that Europe is no longer perceived as a protection, but rather as a threat. That's a problem.
I think that is a problem, and I think if you look at public opinion, particularly in France and in Italy, countries which have traditionally been favorably disposed towards European integration, the mood has changed radically. But I think the mood has changed based on a false understanding of what Europe is and what Europe does. People are
Is Europe being used as a scapegoat?
I think Europe is being used as a scapegoat, often by political parties at national level who are saying, well, of course we don't want to have to do this financial discipline, but Europe is forcing it on us. You know, most people recognize, if you come down to their core beliefs, that governments have to balance their budgets. Most people recognize you cannot go on and on running deficits at public level because it damages your economy.
But isn't there a problem of legitimacy when the orders are coming from Brussels and Europeans feel that their governments are no longer in control?
First of all, the orders are not coming from Brussels. They are decision-taking mostly also by governments and the European parliamentarians, the political decisions. Sometimes the Commission, of course, is overdoing its job. I agree, and some rules and regulations are perhaps not necessary. But mostly it's done together with the governments and the ministers. They don't have the courage to come out and defend what they did in Brussels. Or let's take the example of freedom of movement in Europe. Prime Minister Cameron said, well, it's a big issue of misusing of social services and many people will come. Then he said, well, not that many people came. I think the latest news is that 24 Romanians came, 24, not millions of them. And now he says, well, we will publish the figures later after the elections. And even to his right wing, he had to say, well, stop. The migration from Romania and Bulgaria is quite reasonable. So politicians, national politicians, don't have the courage to tell the truth. They just, you know, as the wind is blowing, they follow and not leading.
Is it the case that these populist parties are now setting the agenda, as in Britain, for instance?
Well, there is a tendency of parties on the centre-right to try to occupy the ground of the parties to the more extreme right because they fear loss of votes. And so people like David Cameron, who is a Democrat, starts playing with sometimes quite dangerous ideas. I think Hannes Swoboda was right at the beginning of the program when he said the only way to tackle extremists or populists is to explain to people why you hold the beliefs you hold, why you pursue the policies you pursue. And that requires greater debate, it requires greater attention to public concerns, and it requires politicians strong enough to stand up and defend the European Union and why we need to be part of it.
Doesn't always happen, as you said earlier. Hannes Swoboda, you mentioned that these parties aren't interested in Europe. Now, two leading parties, the Front National of France and the PVV, the Freedom Party of the Netherlands, want to unite and form a political group here in the parliament. For this to happen, they need 25 MEPs, I believe, from 7 different countries. How successful will they be, and why would this make a difference?
I don't think they will be very successful. First of all, to find all the parties to agree, because alone, for example, the seat of Strasbourg for the European Parliament will divide the Dutch party, who are fiercely against, and the nationalist French, who are, of course, for it. And many other issues are dividing them. Migration, for example. How can you convince for people, extremists from nationalists from Bulgaria and Romania, to share their seats with people from nationalist group who say no migration, we have to reduce the freedom of movement.
And by the way, UKIP has said that it doesn't want to join a group.
It says that before the election.
Right.
But let's wait
you
to see what
suspect that
happens.
they will change their mind.
But again, I don't think they will really be successful, because nationalists per se are against other nationalists. But maybe if they come together, they should try, and we will see that they will fail. And again, the influence, what does UKIP really do to change European legislation? Nothing. They speak, they get a lot of money for that, and go home, and they do their work, under guillemets, at home with paroles, with slogans. But this does not change Europe. Of course we have something to change in Europe. The liberals have different ideas than we have, but very often we find a consensus afterwards. This is politics, to change Europe and to make it better. This is the fight, and not to just say we are against it.
Now, the danger, of course, is that if they have more and more seats, you will have to unite forces. You will have to join forces, and that will make your rhetoric less audible.
Well, look, in order to pass any major piece of legislation, we need a co-decision majority in the European Parliament, which is 62% of the members of the House. Now, given that there's always a certain number of people absent because they're unwell or they're traveling abroad, what that really means is 70% of the members present. And of course, if we are going to pass legislation, this will mean the major mainstream political parties being prepared to compromise to legislate in the interests of the European Union rather than to allow the extremists to set the agenda. And that might well mean the European People's Party, the Party of European Socialists, the Liberals and Democrats working together more effectively to defend democracy and to promote economic stability.
We have 4 months to go before the election. We know that turnout will be very important, because the more people come out to vote, the more diverse, I guess, the vote will be. What will your campaign be? How are you going to respond to the fears of these Europeans who are ready to vote for populist parties?
I think what we have to offer, Socialists and Democrats, is to offer what we define as a social Europe. And that means fight against, for example, poverty in all the countries, which drive some people to look for jobs in other countries, even if they don't want. To have, hopefully also with the Liberals together, to have a new posting of workers directive, which is giving possibilities to the member countries to fight against social dumping. These are the answers, concrete answers, and not to fight against migration, but to fight against poverty as a reason of migration. This is one of the examples. Then to have social criteria in the future, not only regarding the interest rate and the debt of the countries, but also look, how is poverty developing? How is income differentials in the wealth developing in different member countries? We have to show that of course, we want to have economic reforms, we want to have competitivity, but we also want to keep the core of the social welfare states, the core of it. The reforms are necessary, but the core should be defended. That is our ideas, and the Liberals will have other ideas, but at the end of the day, this is the competition between reasonable political groups.
Well, I'd like to bring in now our partner in Talking Europe, Tim King, the editor of European Voice, a weekly newspaper on EU news. He'll be joining us very soon to give us his view on the question. Tim, welcome to our show. You've been listening to the program. I know you've been writing a lot on Euroscepticism, on the rise of populist parties. At European Voice, do you regard this as a European problem, or does it go beyond?
Well, I heard Graham Watson saying that the UKIP situation was not particularly different from the situation in Italy or France. As a non-politician here, my own view is that the political systems in various countries are broke, but they're all broken in different ways. And I do see differences between them, and I think it is to the extent that things are common. I'm not sure about that. For me, a formative experience is having watched the situation after the elections in Austria at the end of 1999, where you will remember, but though I think by then you were here in the European Parliament, you had a situation where the European Union was trying to tell the Austrians what to do and threatening sanctions and all the rest of it. And I think the great lesson from that experience, and lots of people have scars from it, was that actually you had to respect a political situation which had its own particularities in an individual country. And in Austria you had a situation where, I can be ruder about it perhaps than Mr. Swoboda, but you had a situation where the old coalition of the centre-right and the centre-left had been propping themselves up for ages, and gradually the electorate had been becoming more and more disenchanted.
Some of the criticisms that the eurosceptics, or the anti-Europeans, because that's really what they are, some of the criticisms that they level against the European Union are justified. The European Union needs reform. The trouble is that the solution that they put forward, which is to break up the European Union, to go back to being 28 different nation states, is not the way forward in a world in which, in order to be competitive, you need economies of scale. And 508 million Europeans, because that's the total that we have in the 28 countries, is still a small number of people compared to twice that number of Indians, almost 3 times that number of Chinese.
So Graham Watson, Hannes Swoboda, Tim King, thank you very much for taking part in this edition of Talking Europe. Now please stay with me. I'll return just after the news break in about 10 minutes.